We're live
And
now,
we're
right,
live.
Monica? Yay. Perfect. Thanks, Monica.
Yeah, no worries.
So thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Nikki. I am the VP of Development for Palm Beach Tech. And just to give everybody a brief overview of what we do and who we are a tech nonprofit, just about to have our 5th year anniversary next month. We actually, yep, Todd, I know it's exciting. Thank you, Michelle. And we actually just announced about 3 weeks ago that we are expanding to become a regional organization. So again, that's other big news for us because we've been working, pretty hard over the past year or so to make that happen. And, have been building some great partnerships from Miami, Broward, and now our membership is from Martin County to Miami. So we're definitely expanding more than just the county, which is great. To give you guys an idea of different things, obviously, like we're doing today, we've got workshops available for educational purposes, but also different panel discussions. We've got our community coffees, our tech talks on Mondays. There's more than enough things to get involved in, educate yourself, get ingrained with the community. And our whole goal and mission is to build South Florida into a tech hub. So hopefully, as we saw this morning before we started recording, was you start actually recognizing faces, connecting with the community, like getting to know who people are. And that's the whole goal and intention, is to bring everybody together, bring the tech community together. So I want to go ahead and introduce Todd. Todd's our instructor for this morning. And Todd, if you want to kind of give us a brief overview of who you are, what you do, and then please feel free to take it away.
Sure. Yeah. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Todd Albert. And I actually come from, we were kind of discussing a little bit before we started. I come from an academic background. I was a college professor, scientist, did work for NASA and lots of other cool stuff, traveled around the world, studying glaciers and climate, and finally got back to my roots, which is computer programming. I've been doing this for 37, 38 years. And I've been working in this field for a while now, really enjoying it, really enjoying training some of the young junior developers, and just recently decided to kind of merge my academic background and my development background to create a school, BocaCode. So we're now open. Our physical doors will open in about a month and a half, and right around the time to come out of quarantine, our doors will be open and we'll be ready, in full swing. But we're actually starting classes in a week from Monday. So check us out online at BocaCode.com. Yay! And if you like what you see today, we've got a lot more where that came from. So did you want me to just jump in, Nikki? All right. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we can get rolling. Can you guys see that? All right, so that's what we're doing today. We're going to do a quick intro to programming and JavaScript. I'm trying to, what my goal here is to kind of demystify a little bit, the idea of programming. I think for a lot of people, this is like a really scary concept. And actually, there's a lot to it that, in my opinion, is actually very easy. I've learned other languages before, and, and honestly, a lot of the programming languages are among the easiest to learn. So, and please, I'm going to try and go through kind of quickly, but, if you have questions, stop me, put them in the chat, come out of mute and shout at me, whatever. So what do you need to program, especially at the level we're looking at today? That's where I'm going to start. Then we're going to look really quickly at some HTML, which, you all look at all day. CSS and JavaScript, and get kind of into the real programming there. So let's start out. What do you need, right? To be a programmer, what do you need? Well, mainly, if you're a web programmer, you need a web browser, which, most of us use Chrome. You need a text editor, which nowadays almost every developer I know is using VS Code, and you'll see a little bit of VS Code today when we jump into some examples. And you need curiosity and patience. If you look at something and you kind of wonder how it works, like, how does this web thing, how does this work? Or how did they do that on that web page? That's cool. That kind of curiosity is really what makes people into successful web developers, successful developers rather. And you need patience, because sometimes, you can pound your head trying to figure some of this stuff out. So we're going to start, with a quick look at HTML, because it just is, in some ways, is very simple. In other ways, it's actually more complex and tougher to do than other things. But basically, when you are on a website, you're in a browser, which may not seem like much to you, but really browsers have a lot of stuff going on in the background. And when you type in a URL, like you say www.google.com in your address bar, your browser is actually going out to that address and it's requesting from Google that document. And it's actually just saying, hey, you have a page here at this website, at this address. I want that page. And there's a lot of like handshaking and going on and small talk, if you will, between the browser and the server where it's getting the document from. And finally, the server's like, okay, here you go. And it transmits the document. And then your browser takes that document, reads through, and starts putting it together on the page. And, this might sound kind of technical, but if you think about it, if I send you a Word document, right, that Word document, it's going to have all the words that I typed, but it's also going to have some other code to say, hey, he wants this bold, and this paragraph is going to be full justified, and this should be italicized, and this heading should be this font, and all of that. And so when your when Microsoft Word opens that document, it's going to interpret that code and display it, and hopefully it looks the same in your version of Word than it does in mine. So it's a really similar kind of thing. If there's images, your browser has to go out to the server and say, hey, I need this image, and then it puts it on and it interprets that document and figures out where to put stuff. So HTML actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the key here is markup. The idea is that this is just like the content on the page, and then there's like some markup in there, just little like what we call tags that tell the browser like, hey, make this bold. Hey, make this big. Hey, add this font here. So there's just markup there. And this is kind of what it looks like, right? You can have, so in the blue here, we have what are the tags that tell the browser what to do. So it says, hey, we're going to add a section. And then there's a P tag. Notice the P tag at the beginning, and then it's closed here at the end, right? So this section says, here's the section beginning. The slash section, that's a closing tag that says this is the end. So you can easily see visually, right? Here's this section, and in it we have a paragraph, P, and then in the white you could just read, welcome to BocaCode, period, right? And then there's another tag here, strong open, strong close, around BocaCode. So your browser might render this like this. Well, creates a section, adds a paragraph, puts welcome to BocaCode, and then makes BocaCode bold, right? Or strong. So this is the crux. This is the gist of HTML right here. They're just these tags that we use to mark up our text, right? So if you just look at the white there, just the white text, it just says welcome to BocaCode. And then there's some tags around it that are marking it up, kind of like if you use a red pen and you're marking up somebody's paper and you're like, get rid of this, highlight this, underline this. It's kind of the same thing. It's just a language we use to tell the browser, hey, make this bold, make this, etc. So we can actually, if we look at an HTML page, there's a little bit of extra code in here, and I'm just trying to build up slowly. The first tag here is what's called a doc type. And this just tells your browser, hey, we're going to give you a new page here, and this is of type HTML. The newest version of HTML, this is like the standard format here, HTML5, what all modern browsers use. And then you notice we have HTML tag start and finish, and that just says, here's a page. This is the beginning of the page, here's the end of the page. So your browser knows when it gets to that end tag, it's done, right? Anything beyond that is probably just extra noise that doesn't belong there. And usually an HTML document has a head and a body, like us, right? There's a head and a body. And the head is kind of like the brains of what's going on. You don't see that. The user doesn't see the head. It's really more for like Google and the browser giving it information about the page. Maybe it has information about your company or things like that. So it's kind of where you store like, just meta information that the person visiting your page doesn't need to see, but maybe Google does, right? Or maybe your browser does. We don't have that head here just to keep things simple, but then there's the body, start and finish, right? And this tells your browser, hey, this is what I want you to show the user. And here we have a heading, and it's H1 is like the top level heading, the biggest heading. This should be like the title of your page, the heading 1. You should only have one of these on the page. And then maybe you have subtitles that are H2, like heading level 2. And within those sections, you can have H3 and 4 and 5 and so on. But H1 is the highest level, the biggest heading, right? And you can see over here, it's just rendering that big and bold, right? And then you have a paragraph, and here's that. And we can continue to just add tags to add different kinds of things to the site. Like here's an A tag, which actually creates a link, and it needs, where do you point? Where does this link go to, right? So the A here, A start and finish, tells it, hey, make this clickable and take you somewhere. And then where do you go? Well, it says, the reference is www.bocacode.com. So if we click this link, we should go, our browser should take us to our crappy old ugly site, which is currently being redone, but that's a story for another day. So you can add other things like images, right, with an image tag and so forth. So you can kind of layer these in to build up your page, right? And let's jump over. What I want to do is actually take you into Visual Studio Code and show you what this looks like. So what I have here is I've just created just an HTML page here that we can edit. And then I have a browser over here where we can actually view it, just to get an idea. And one of the reasons why developers now love VS Code is you can do simple things like type HTML or HTM, choose, oh, I want an HTML5 document, and boom, it fills all this out for you. So you don't have to like memorize all this stuff. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to like, oh, what do I put here? Is it, exclamation point, doc type it? You don't have to memorize all this. You get this right, with one line in VS Code. And you can always look this up if you're starting a new page. This is also adding that the language of our page is English, right? And then here we actually have the head that tells us some information like what character set we're using, the viewport, which is, useful for mobile, like, hey, zoom to 100% to start on a mobile, because on mobile you can pinch in and zoom on some websites, right? So this just says, hey, start it at 100%. And then here we can give this a title like my first web page, right? And then inside the body here, this is where we're going to add our stuff, right? Like we can add an H1 tag, right? That says my first heading. And then maybe add a paragraph that's like my first paragraph in HTML, exclamation point. Save this, reload over here. And now notice it tells us the title on the tab here in our browser. It tells us that title, my first web page. So your browser is using this title to usually name the tab here. And then right off the bat, we've got the heading and our first paragraph. And it's amazing, but it's ugly, right? This is super ugly, right? What web page looks like this? Hopefully not since like 1992, right? So that brings us to the next section, which is CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, which is a long mouthful, but basically the keyword here is style, right? This is how we add style to our pages. So we can do something like say, hey, the body, I want the background to be pink and I want the color to be white. And then your browser might change how it looks like that, give you a pink background with white. Like, well, that's not the pink I want. I want this pink right here, right? The BocaCode pink, right? So you can actually use the RGB values or the hex code for this to update that and get that exact pink. So you can really control, you know, if you just want to do something quick and dirty, you could just use the word pink, blue, red, yellow, you know, aqua, whatever. But if you really want to dial in the specific color, you can use the actual RGB hex value, which you can get from Photoshop. You can look up, you can do all kinds of things. There's all different ways of getting this, as you'll see. So if we wanted to style this document that we just created, we can say like, hey, this H1, make it this color, which is the pink, and the P, make it this color, which is like a medium gray. So let's jump over and try that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just in my head here, in the head of my document, I'm just going to add a style, and we're going to do just that. We're going to say H1 tags, give them a color of, what did we have? FF216E. And notice that in VS Code, it gives you a little sample here of that color. So you can like see visually that color right there, which is really nice. And then I'm going to say my paragraph, let's make that color, let's just say gray. And now if we reload this, now I've got a little bit of style here applied, right? And you can get really, really, really specific with this using what are called IDs and classes. And an ID is just something you can add to a tag. To any tag in HTML, you can add an ID, but it's unique. Okay, think of this like a social security number, right? Only one tag gets an ID. If you want to put something where you're going to be like, oh, I want this paragraph and this paragraph and this paragraph to look the same, you can add a class to them, right? So classes, oftentimes we like, if there's an error, you might use a class that's error that you make color red, right? So anytime you add the class error, that becomes red. So this can look now, your code can start to look like this, where you can say this section here, let's make this, give this an ID of title, right? An ID, because we're only going to have one of these on the page. And then this class, we're going to make subtitle, right? Which we might have in across multiple, you know, across in multiple places on the page. And then to reference an ID in CSS, you just use hash title, right? And you can color that. And to reference a class, you just use dot. So anytime you see, you know, the class subtitle, give it this color. So that's kind of the quick and dirty gist of like, I mean, I know it's just a real high level primer on HTML and CSS, but honestly, in your browser, you can go to any website, right? And if you go up to view, and sometimes you have to turn on the developer tools in your preferences, but you can view the source, which gives you all of the HTML that's on this page. Some of them are commented out, you can see the green, but you know, this is the HTML that makes up this page. You can also say view develop, you know, well, we'll get into this in a minute, but I just want you to see that you can look at a page, you can see the HTML rather, you can actually look at the CSS, which we'll show you in a bit. And you can actually play around with it and make changes to the page just in your browser. You're not changing it on the server for anyone else. You're just changing it how it appears in your browser. So actually, let's do that for a second on this page. Let's what we can do is you can click this button here that says find an element on the page, and let's find this image here, right? And this image right here takes us right in there. And then right on the right here, we can actually add some styles, right? Whoops. So we can do something like add a blur to this, right? Filter blur, and we can, crank up the blur on there, take a screenshot and be like, look, your image is blurry. What the heck, Now this is only happening in my browser. Nobody else is seeing this. And there's really cool things we could do. Like when you hover over something, you can make it blur or invert it or change the size, all kinds of cool things like that. So that's, quick and dirty primer to HTML and CSS, just so you kind of have an understanding. Hopefully I demystified it a little bit, but what I really want to spend the most of the time on is on JavaScript and actual programming. Now, JavaScript as a language, there's a million different programming languages. JavaScript is among my favorites, but it's really odd in that most programming languages, when you first start learning them, the first thing you learn is input and output, right? The first thing you learn is output, right? Every time you write a program, the first program when you start a new language is usually, to output on the screen, hello world, right? That's like the famous test program for every language. But JavaScript doesn't really have that. It kind of JavaScript runs in a browser. So it relies on that host to provide the output. And then most programming languages have an input where maybe like you wait for the user to type something. You accept, keystrokes or something like that. JavaScript doesn't have that either. It relies on the host. And JavaScript started as just something to manipulate websites and run in browsers. It started back in 1995. The first version was released, I think, in 96 for Netscape Navigator. You guys remember that? Became Mozilla Firefox. This was like the only language that actually worked inside of a browser. But because of that, it was relying a lot on the browser to do certain things. JavaScript is everywhere now. If you guys have like one of the Amazon Alexa devices, it's all running on JavaScript. In fact, you can write code for that. A lot of our IoT devices are, so many of the things that we do and touch in a regular day-to-day basis are now running JavaScript. It's now everywhere. It actually borrows heavily from C and Java for its syntax and structure, but there's actually no formal relationship with Java. The name actually, what was happening is in 1996, Java was becoming super popular. So they just named their language JavaScript. Just like, if I built a car company and named it like, Tesla and, plus or something, it's like, it's like crazy, but because it was open source, I guess they didn't get sued. But there's no real relationship between Java and JavaScript. A lot of the things that you're going to see here, there's like a lot of like fancy words and terms and stuff that get thrown around in programming, but a lot of these things, like, they shouldn't be scary, right? So I'm going to tell you, JavaScript supports functional and object-oriented programming. You don't know what that means yet, probably, right? You shouldn't if you're, new to programming. But I remember, I used to, when I coded a long time ago, there was no object-oriented programming. And then about 25 years ago or so, this idea of object-oriented programming started becoming really popular. And, it was like, oh, this is this new language and it's object-oriented and everything's objects and it's so cool, which you're going to learn what an object is in just a few minutes. And then more recently, when I came back to this world, I was working with these young developers and they're like, hey, man, what do you think about functional programming? I'm like, what the hell is functional programming? I've never heard of that, right? It's like this new term. And really, like, how it used to just be farming, and then like there became organic farming, right? Because like what happened is we used to be organic farmers, then we started using like chemicals, then this like new thing came along of like organic farming, right? It's just what we used to call farming, right? And at first when they were talking about functional programming, I was like, ooh, what's that? And it's just not object oriented. In other words, it's the stuff I was always doing from the beginning. And yet I'd never heard of functional programming, right? I just didn't know that term. So don't be afraid of the terms, right? The concepts here are pretty simple. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at these concepts in very simple building blocks: variables, objects, functions, operators, and controls. And those are the fundamental building blocks of right there of JavaScript, right? And they're all relatively very simple, as you're going to see. You know, my buddy Todd, who's on the call, you know, this guy can build a house from scratch. You walk into his house, you're like, holy crap, this is amazing. You built this, right? But ultimately, right, it's just, you know, wood and you know, nails and metal and really simple things that maybe each component that he built together was very simple to him. When you see the whole thing put together, months and months of work, it's amazing, right? And that, I think, is what intimidates people about programming, is they see the program and they're like, whoa, how would I ever build that? But it's just building it up piece by piece. And these simple building blocks are not all that crazy. So the first one's a variable, which is just a named memory location with an assigned value, right? Which is a fancy definition, but it just looks like this. You say like, hey, JavaScript, I want to assign a new variable. We're going to call it age, and we're going to make it equal to 44. And you don't have to do all this crazy stuff like tell JavaScript where in memory to store this. JavaScript's like, dude, I got you. Don't worry. I'll put it here. Don't worry. It's there when you need it. And anytime now I need that value, I could just say age, and JavaScript's like 44, right? It makes that connection for you and stores that value, and you could change it. You could say, hey, add 3 years to, you know, add 3 to age, right? There's 3 different types of variables in JavaScript. There's numbers, 44, string, like a name, and then Boolean, which just is a fancy name for true or false. And that's it. So you can have things like age equals 44, which is a number. And in JavaScript and in a lot of languages, when you have double slash like this, it means this is a comment. You could put a comment anywhere at the end of a line, the beginning of a line, whatever, but everything after this is commented out on that line. So here I'm just telling JavaScript, create a variable age, set it to 44. And JavaScript's like, cool, that's a number. I can see that. And you could say, all right, create total 17.25. Yeah, that's number 2. JavaScript dynamically makes these variables, sets these variable types for you. Some languages you actually have to say, like, make this an integer, age equals 44. Make me a new, floating point variable, total 17, but JavaScript sets these dynamically. So when I say name equals Todd, JavaScript creates a string variable for you. If I say awesome equals true, it says, all right, that's a Boolean. And that's it. This is it. This is variables. These are the basic building blocks in JavaScript. Relatively simple. There's some kind of special cases that get a little confusing. One is when you set a variable to null, which just means it's empty. But then there's one that seems the same, but is actually quite different, which is undefined. So if I say, like, this variable is null, that I'm defining it. I'm saying this is empty. Whereas if I say this variable is undefined, I'm telling it, I don't know what it is. It might be empty. It might be 47. It might be, Palm. It doesn't, we don't know. So these are 2 special cases. In the beginning, they're kind of confusing how they're, what these mean, but eventually, they get understood very quickly. The next level up, right? So now you got variables down. We go to the next level and we get to objects. And objects are just a more complex type of variable. Basically, it's, an assemblage of keyed collections. So what does that mean? It's basically like take a bunch of variables and stick them together and give them one name. So instead of saying like name equals Todd, age equals 44, awesome equals true, I could say person, and then use these curly brackets to say this person has a name, this person has an age, and here's the value. And this person, are they awesome? Yes, right? And that's it. That's basic. That's what an object is. And this became this whole new movement, 25, 30 years ago, to, instead of using single variables, be able to use these grouped variables like this. And it was all the rage, and it still is. And in fact, JavaScript works extremely well with objects. Then there's other things like arrays, which, if you're familiar with mathematics, matrix or array, it's just a special type of object, but they have some really cool, powerful methods in JavaScript, which we'll get into. But basically, it's just like a collection or stack of objects or variables, right? Usually they're the same type. So again, a lot of these definitions are like, they sound scary, but then you look at it, you're like, oh, that makes sense, right? So instead of just saying like fruit 1 equals apple, fruit 2 equals banana, and fruit 3 equals orange, you can create an array that has apple, comma, banana, comma, orange, and you use square brackets to create an array. So curly brackets creates an object, square brackets creates an array. That's it. You see, when you define it, JavaScript knows if you use curlies, you're creating an object. If you use square, you're creating an array, and you don't have to even tell it. It's very simple. JavaScript is a pretty easy to work with language. And then finally, we can combine the two and create you can combine them in all kinds of ways, but here is it's an array of objects, right? So we create an array, and then inside we put an object: Todd, Dev, awesome, Emily, UX, awesome, right? So this is our teaching staff at BocaCode, right? I teach Dev, Emily teaches UX. We also have some TAs, but just trying to keep it simple here. So let's get into one other thing, and then we'll actually play around a little bit. So the next thing to talk about is functions. And technically in JavaScript, a function is just a special type of object, but that you don't need to know at this level, right? But a function is basically just a set of statements that perform a task or calculate something for you. And they could be really simple, like you could, but basically the way you define a function is you just say function, right? So like the way you define a variable or an object is var or variable. Here we actually say function, you give it a name, you have some parentheses, you'll see what these are for in a minute, curly braces, right? I said it's really basically an object, and then you do some stuff in there, right? That's where you actually perform a task or calculate a value, right? So what is this parentheses for? You have to have them, even if you don't have anything in them, but they can be used to actually take an argument or arguments. So something like, hey, let's log a message, and you can actually pass in a message to it, and then we console log out the message. So let's jump over into VS Code here and actually look at this. So, if you say like function log message, right, like that, and then say console log message, right? Actually, let's do this somewhere else. Let's do this. I'm going to go to another website that I really love, called REPL. And REPL allows you to create these nice, these fun little, in any programming language. This is one that I use. Well, get rid of all that. This is one I use often, just a little playground here for me to play around. But when you create a new REPL, you can choose any language you want. So if you're trying to learn a language and you just want to play around, Python, Dart, anything, right? PHP, you can create a little engine here, and it gives you your output over here. So we're just going to run in JavaScript, right? We're going to say, create this function log message. We're going to give it a message here. We're going to take a message as an input, right? So we're saying we're going to call this function with something, and it's going to output it's going to log to our console. It's going to put out in this console here whatever our message is. Now this is stupid because why would I call log message with a message when I could call console log? It's the same thing, right? But it's just to demonstrate this. So now I can call this by just saying log message, hello, Palm Beach Tech, right? And now if I run this, I get in the console, hello, Palm Beach Tech, right? Very, very simple. So functions can take an argument, you know, and now remember, if we use that, if we use that code that I wrote before to say like person, and then we're going to give this person a name, like let's give it Nikki's name, right? Oh no, because I don't want to guess your age here. So age 44, awesome, true, right? And now we can do something like, let's create a function that's called say hello. And we're going to pass in the person, right? And so we're going to say hello here to that person. And now what we're going to console log is hello space, and then we're going to add, or let's just say comma, hello, comma, and then the person's name. So we use dot to, we say person dot name, and it'll refer to that. So if I run this, we get hello, Todd, right? So we can create another function like function how old is persona. My JavaScript's in Spanish now. And we could say console log, you know, person is, and then we can put the person's age here, years old, something like that. And now if I run this, what will I get? I will get hello, Todd. Why? Because I'm defining this function here, but I'm never calling it, right? So let me just show you that. If I run, I get hello, Todd. So I would have to actually call the function down here. So how old is person? And then it says, hello, Todd, person is 44. And what's interesting here is 44 is a number. But when I add 44 to person is, this string here, right? JavaScript sees this, right? This is a string. Then I'm adding a number. What JavaScript does for me, and a lot of programming languages do this, but some are really strict and won't allow this. They'll be like, how can you add a number to a string? Like, that doesn't make sense. But JavaScript's like, oh, I'll turn this into a string for you. And it just turns this into a string for us automatically, and we get that, right? So if instead I say output person is, output that string, excuse me, and then output the person's age and output how many years old they are, and I don't add those, right, which is an operator, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I think you guys are smart enough. Now when it outputs 44, notice it's orange, it's a number. So it's outputting string, number, string here, right? And the only way you can really tell that is because it's color coding it for you. And it's showing you, hey, that's actually outputting the number there. So that's just, you know, quick and dirty. Functions can also return variables or values or objects. So, you know, these are stupid functions that I was just creating, but a real function might be something like, hey, calculate the sales tax, right? Where you give it your subtotal and your tax rate, and it returns you a tax, right? Which, you know, again, this is simple one-liner. Some functions just are. Some functions are that simple. And so we can then, well, actually, let's stay there. We can, calling functions, right? We've already kind of seen this, right? If you have just a straight up function, you call it just by giving the name with the parentheses. But now with a return, like we have for tax rate, what we do is we're going to send in the values, but then we set it equal to something, right? Now it returns us a variable, so we want to save that variable, right? So let's, and this is kind of a silly example, but let's actually build a real one, right? So let's get rid of all this and let's write our function called, let's call it get tax amount, right? And we're going to pass in here a total, or let's call this subtotal. And we're going to pass in a tax rate. And we're going to say, we're going to create a new variable called tax, and it's just going to be subtotal times, can't type today, times tax rate. And now we're going to return that. We're going to return tax. Right? So now we can call this, right? We can, but first we want a total, right? So we're going to say, we're going to create a new variable called like my subtotal. And we're going to say, $17.25. My tax rate, right, where I live is 007. And now we're going to say my tax is, and we can calculate it, or we can just get it by saying get tax amount, pass in my subtotal. And you see how it's even giving me this hint here that's saying this takes a subtotal and a tax rate, right? And returns a number. It's giving me that hint, which is really nice. So I need to add my tax rate, and then I'll get the tax. Well, this is going to call this and this is going to do this, but this isn't very useful unless we actually show some stuff. So let's actually do this. Let's console log, and we're going to say subtotal, right? And then let's my subtotal here. Sorry, let's change this like that, right? So like we're going to print like a receipt, right? Tax. Wow, I can spell really well. And I'm just going to add some spaces here to kind of make these match up. And you're going to see, we're going to tweak this in a minute. And then there's my tax, right? And then we can maybe even console log out like just a little line, right? And then console log, what we should want now is a total, right? So we're going to say total. And then we want to create a new variable called my total, which we haven't done yet, but that would be simple. Just my total is equal to what? It's going to be my subtotal plus my tax, right? And we're going to run this and it's going to be ugly, right? And I'll show you why. So here we get the subtotal 17.25. We get the tax $1.20 or $1.20 and 75 10,000ths of a penny, and our total is 1845.75. This is not what you want to see on your receipt, right? First of all, let's add a space here and take away a space there so the decimals all line up. But we don't want to show these numbers here after 2 decimal places, right? So that's the thing, is we're doing these calculations and we're not rounding or anything. So we want to show this rounded, right? So luckily for us, in JavaScript, we have a really easy way to do that. We can just do, so my tax, we can say to fixed 2. So it's saying fix this to 2 decimal points, right? And we can do that also with my total. And now we get that. Now, this might look funny because this is orange, right? This is a number. These got chopped and created into strings. So just to make it look nice, we should probably do that with the subtotal as well. And now we've got a nice looking receipt, right? Pretty simple. You know, it's pretty robust, but you know, just comes from adding these like very simple adding these very simple building blocks together. And you already saw some of the operators that we have in JavaScript. There's, like adding, multiplying, right? You also have subtracting and division. There's this percent sign is used, it's called a modulus. And that's kind of a funny name, but it basically returns a remainder. So, if you want to say like, oh, we want to break this up into groups of 7, how many do we have left? You can do like that number %7, and it'll tell you how many are left, in the last group, let's say. Then there's some special ones, plus equals. Let me show you what this does is, well, I'll just tell you. Plus equals says take this variable and add this to it, right? So it's like x equals x plus, right? X equals x plus y is what that converts to. And this minus equals is, x equals x minus y. So yeah, let me show you that. So if you have like variable x is equal to 5, and then we can console log x. Whoops. Sorry, got a little carried away. And then we can say x plus equals 10, right? What we should get here is it should console log out 5. And then here, it should console log out 5 plus 10, right? So x should now be equal to 15, 5 plus 10. So let's test that. We run, we get 5, we get 15, right? So that's plus equals. If I do minus equals here, I get 5, and then 5 minus 10 is -5, right? So I should get 5 and -5, and I run that, and that's what I get. So that's what the plus equals and minus equals is. We can also say on the next couple of operators, there's x plus plus, which just means, hey, take x and increment it, add 1 to it. So now we should get 6, right? Let's try it. We get 5 and 6. X minus minus. Now we should get 5 and 4, right? It's just decrementing it. And then what other operators do we have? We have star star, which is just the shorthand for raised to the power of. So if we do, x equals 2, and then x equals 2 to the power of 8, right? And 2 to the 8th, I happen to know, is 256. Every good programmer eventually knows that. So 2, I should get 2, and then I should get 256, and that's what I get. So those are your operators. That's pretty much, that's pretty much it there. Then we have comparisons. So now, everything up to this point is like kind of simple, right? Like, oh, so I could calculate tax and I could calculate little simple things. But once you add comparisons in, right? Is this number less than this, right? Is this number greater than or equal to that? Are these numbers equal? Are these not equal? That's what this means, not equal. And there's a difference between the double equal and the triple equal, which I'll show you in a minute. But now with these comparisons, we can write a function like is drinking age, right? Person. And then we can say, return is the person's age greater than or equal to 21, right? So now I can say, all right, this person is, or let's just say, let's call this person Todd, and Todd is going to have an age of 44 and, amazing is true, right? So we're creating this object, this Todd object, and now we can say is drinking age Todd, and we get true.
My apologies. I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, my watch is thinking I'm talking to it. We can also do something totally different than this and say something like, so I'm going to just jump ahead here and get into the next thing which is controls. And the most powerful one is the if else, right? So we have if else. And this is, once you've got this, you basically can do anything in programming. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say if person is greater than or equal to 21, then we're going to console log serve them up, right? If they're not, so we have an else, and an if statement doesn't have to have an else statement, but if they're not, we can say console log send them home, right? And now we run this, serve them up, right? We can maybe even right here, console log, well, no, forget that. So now we could create another person, right? Like Henry, whose age is 10, right? But he's also amazing. And we could say is drinking age Henry. And now let's get rid of the Todd. And we could say is drinking age Henry. We run this and it says send them home, right? So that right there is the crux of programming. If statements, variables, objects, functions, you got the basic building blocks. From there, it's just adding them and building, build a wall, build a door. Next thing you know, you got a mansion, right? So I just want to take a quick moment here before I open up to questions to plug Palm Beach Tech. I love the Palm Beach Tech community. They're amazing, or soon to be called South Florida Tech, I think. I'm sure you guys are all members. If you're not, check out palmbeachtech.org. Join the Slack, palmbeachtech.org/Slack. Super awesome Slack community, as well as the BocaCode Slack community, which is also really awesome. Check us out. If you like this, if you learned anything in the last hour, just imagine what I could do with 40 hours of your time, 80 hours of your time, or 400 hours of your time. So check us out at BocaCode. We've got a JavaScript class coming up in 10 days that we just chopped the price on dramatically for online, and added a second week for like crazy low price. So check us out. Love to teach you guys some more and really delve into like building websites with this and making interactive stuff. So hopefully you guys learned a little. Hopefully I demystified the whole idea of programming for you a bit, and hopefully got something out of it. So if you have any questions, here I am.
Todd, I've got one quick question here. It looks like they're just asking, like, if you're brand new to all of this, what's the first language that you should start with or recommend, or how do you know how to figure that out?
That's a really great and actually really common question. And then the answer is it depends on what you want to do. So just even with a website, there's really like kind of two sides to a website. So we have what we call a front-end developer who deals with the front end. That's what you see. Like think about a restaurant, right? You go into a restaurant, you only see the front end, right? Where it's the people eating and the servers and a host, right? That's what the user sees is the front end. And for front end development, JavaScript is the only answer. That's it. You just really have JavaScript. And then you might have heard of React or Vue or Angular. those are just like JavaScript libraries or frameworks. So you have to learn JavaScript before you learn React. And that's what we're doing. In 10 days, we're doing a 1-week JavaScript course. And then the following week, we're doing 1 week of React. And you put those two together and now you can build a website. But if you want to work on the back end, right, you want to be working in the kitchen, right? What sends information to the website? Think about a front end developer could build you a really cool, can build you Facebook, right? And you say, oh, I want to be friends with this person and this person, send this person a message. And then you refresh and it's brand new. You're just starting over again. It didn't save any of that information. That's what's the back end. The back end is where all the data is and all the connections are made and all of that, and connecting you to, saving the information. So if you're more interested in that side, then the options open up, but JavaScript can do that too. So if web development is what you're interested in, JavaScript is a really good place to start. Jan was asking about Python. Python is extraordinarily good. It's fairly easy to learn as well. Relative, like, I don't want to make people feel dumb if you're trying to learn programming and I'm like, oh, this is easy. And you're like, what? Relative to, like learning some other languages, Python is one of the easier ones. The amazing thing with Python is like what we just did in like 20 lines of code in Python's like 1 line. It's amazing. But Python, you can't do on the front end of the website. Python, it's a little bit more limited with how you run it. But for things like dealing with scientific data or data analytics, Python is a rock star. If you do anything with like mapping data, Google Maps, that kind of stuff, GIS, Python is amazing. So it's a really powerful language. It's very cool to start there if what you're doing is like business analytics, data analytics. But if what you want to do is more web-based, I really recommend starting with JavaScript. And JavaScript is a fairly forgiving, easy language. So you learn that first. And then Python and JavaScript look a lot alike. So once you learn one, it's fairly easy to learn another. And almost every language we use today comes from C. Back years ago, there were only like 3 or 4 languages. C became the one that all of our modern languages are born from. So when you learn one, it's kind of like, if you learn C, C is like Latin, right? So many of the languages in modern day times are, borrow heavily from Latin, right? That's like C. I'm not telling you to go learn C. I'm just saying if you learn, learning JavaScript's like learning Spanish, right? You're gonna understand some Portuguese and some Italian if you just learn Spanish, right? So great place to start. Yeah, I'm also doing a Python course, I think, in October. So if you do want to learn Python and data analytics, we've got that coming as well. That answer your guys' question?
Yes, I think that was actually, you're such a great explainer for things, makes it so much easier. I mean, I'm the non-technical side of Palm Beach Tech, so if I can get it, then I know you must explain things well.
If Nikki can get it.
If I can get it, anybody can do it.
Now you're making that, you're making that one person that didn't get it feel stupid though. So
no, that was not my intention.
No, I was trying to keep it, as easy to understandable. And that's what but that's the thing is like, that was just an hour. Like if you spend an hour a day on this, or you spend a few hours a day on this, before you know it, the world's your oyster and you could really do anything. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking in the chat. I don't see any other questions. Everybody's just saying thank you, wonderful job.
Thank you guys all for coming. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And I will drop really quick. I know, Jen, you put the
Todd.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And Jen, you put the link for BocaCode in there already, right?
She did. And it's pretty easy. BocaCode.com. It's, not hard to find.
Okay, perfect.
And even easier to join us on Slack.
Yeah, one click and you're in our Slack group, which, we post a lot of jobs. I mean, not not as robust as Palm Beach Tech, but we try and add some unique job opportunities and helpful tips. Palm Beach Tech also has a developers channel where it's really good. Like the community in South Florida is amazing for developers. There's in Silicon Valley, developers are very much like, they keep to themselves. They're super protective. They don't want you to know anything that they know, because that, now they can't outcompete you. In South Florida, everybody's just trying to lift each other up. The community here is amazing. If you get stuck on something, you jump on Slack and there's a million people that want to help you. So it's really easy to get started, because when you get stuck, you've got a whole network of friends that are like, oh, I've been there. Here's how you get unstuck. So it's really an awesome community and growing.
Perfect.
And there's a ton of jobs, of jobs for developers.
Yes, which actually reminds me, thank you, Todd, for saying that, is we actually have our Virtual Career Expo coming up on July 15th. So if anybody happens to be looking for a job in here, please go to the Palm Beach Tech website and you'll see it up there. And Jen actually just dropped in the BocaCode email, or I'm sorry, the website again, to help anybody that's looking for their Slack channel. But we are just a few minutes over time. So I wanted to say thank you,
Thanks
everybody,
again,
for coming. Thank you again, Todd and Jen, and hopefully we'll see more of you guys again soon.
Well, you know it.
Have a great day, guys.
So long. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ciao.